provided to our schools over the last years. With me today, I'd like to recognize our leadership team. In attendance are my deputy, Ron Nozoy, assistant superintendents, David Wu, Corey Moriyama, Leila Hayashida, Stephen Schatz, and Amy Coons. In the interest of time, actually, they will not be presenting anything, but they are available to help with questions during the question and answer period. We provided to the committee a PowerPoint presentation that I will not go over every single slide in the interest of time, and because the notes are also provided, there's a lot of detail in the information that has already been provided to you. So I'll try to stick with highlights. First of all, of course, we continue to focus on our mission of educating children and getting them ready to succeed in college, career, and citizenship. To do that with the support of the appointed board, we've established a new strategic plan, and we're trying to stay very focused on that. On slide 4, you'll see, on page 4, you'll see the pyramid that we use pretty consistently through all of our work to focus us on orange, which is goal 1, blue, which is green, which is goal 2, which focuses on our employees and our staff success, and blue, which is our systems of support, the infrastructure that supports all of our schools. We've attached a little bit of a roadmap that shows our progress. We've been trying to build on the work each year and not add new things, except as supported by the work that's been done previously. We've made some notation of some highlights in the achievements that our students have accomplished over the last few years. We're very proud of our NAEP scores. In 2011 and 2013, we've showed consistent improvement in both 4th and 8th grade English language arts and math. For the first time, we actually show our students in 4th grade exceeding the national average in math. We're not saying we're there yet, but the progress has been significant. We think that's a trend and some momentum that we would like to continue and sustain. We're committed to doing that. Our race to the top, the last time we were here, was at high risk by the U.S. Department of Education. I'm very pleased to report that we are no longer on high risk. Secretary Duncan has been very complimentary of the very hard work that our staff and our schools have done to get us off of high risk. I wanted to highlight a couple of the charts that are in the PowerPoint presentation. First, on page 9, our Hawaii State assessment has shown consistent improvement over the years. It's dramatic, it's not enough, but we do want to recognize the hard work of our teachers, our principals, our schools, and our state office staff to get this momentum going and to continue it in future years. One of the things to note about this is that more of our students are enrolling in college, and the number of students needing remediation, that is taking classes that are not college credit-bearing classes, is going down. We think that's a sign that our students are graduating from high school ready to be successful at higher education, and we're very, very pleased with that. On page 10 is an interesting graph that puts two data points together. One is that our student enrollment numbers continue to rise, and that's the black line. You'll see a decrease in the coming year, but that's because of the change in the entrance age for kindergarten. We anticipate losing about 5,000 students, the late-born fives, who will not be entering kindergarten. The blue line is actually our dollars, our budget, and I kind of jokingly say that that big drop is the year I started as superintendent, and that's actually true. But the real reason for that big drop is that is the year that we received ARRA funding from the feds, and that replaced for those years, for that year, some of our general fund support. And the legislature had committed and did, in fact, restore most of that reduction. But again, we are seeing an increase in enrollment even with the decrease from the change in the kindergarten age. On page 11, you'll see the increase in the number of students who are economically disadvantaged, and that is significant for us because we do provide additional supports for students who have special needs, English language learners, special needs students, and those who are economically disadvantaged. So that does have an impact on the services that our schools provide to the students. The next page does show a breakdown of the methods of funding, and as noted, a lot of our money comes from the general fund support, and again, we thank you very, very much for that support. Specifically on our operating budget, I think most everyone here is familiar with the EDN structure of our budget. On page 15, we provided a historic perspective on our general fund appropriations. Of note, our budget in the coming year is actually less than what we had in 2008. And you'll note also that of all the EDNs, the one category that has in fact increased is EDN 100, which is appropriate. That is our school-based budget. That's the funding that goes directly to schools. But again, EDNs 200, 300, 400, 500 have all seen some decreases. A summary of our supplemental budget request is on page 16. Should it be granted in its entirety, we would actually be slightly below our operating budget for the current year. With respect to the specific requests in our budget, what the slides depict is requests by EDN. The color coding indicates which goal of our strategic plan they fall into. So we've tried to kind of meld our budget and the EDN process with our strategic plan so you can see how these expenditures would support our accomplishment of our goals. So again, orange is for student success, green is for staff success or support for our employees, and goal 3 is around the infrastructure. Our biggest request in this supplemental budget is for an increase in the weighted student formula of $14 million. The Committee on Weights had actually recommended a significant amount more. We do believe that the WSF has not, the per pupil weighting has not increased in a number of years. Schools are doing a tremendous amount in terms of the work to transform schools. This amount is the equivalent of approximately 1 teacher position. Again, the actual expenditure would be dependent on the principal's decision-making on what their school needs, but this would go into base funding for each school. Item number 2 is for continuing our work with advanced placement classes. We've seen a significant increase in the number of students taking AP coursework. We think that's a very good indicator for students in their future years after graduation. We've had a lot of enthusiasm, and this provides for professional development for the teachers to provide those courses as well as supports for the students. Item 3 is the High Core program, which is a very, very successful alternative learning center for students. There was a budget proviso, and this would provide the funding to fully fund that proviso. There are 2 items for WASC accreditation. We split the expenditures for WASC accreditation into 2 areas. One is the direct support for schools that are undergoing accreditation. The second is for the overall administration of accreditation process, and that is actually an EDN 200, but I'll speak to both of them now. The board has set as one of our goals, one of our objectives, to have all schools in the state of Hawaii accredited by WASC. It's a high mark. It's a sign of quality of our school operations. All of our secondary schools, both middle and high school, are accredited by WASC. We'd like to extend that also to our elementary schools. Our schools, it's a lot of work, but our schools are excited by that. We're doing it over the course of a number of years. So we're planning to do 30 schools a year. This funding would provide support for the travel and the other fees that are incurred when schools are undergoing accreditation. Number 5, the Strive High accountability system. We have, again, 2 areas of budget requests for Strive High, both in EDN 100 and again in EDN 200. Strive High, pursuant to the requests actually of the legislature in a concurrent resolution, we were asked to apply to the U.S. Department of Education for flexibility under the No Child Left Behind Act. We were granted, we applied for and were granted that flexibility, and the result is our Strive High performance system. This initial request for the $60,000 is to support the data systems and the validation work that's needed to actually implement the performance system. The second is in EDN 200 is around the instructional supports. We did do a briefing last year to outline the elements of the Strive High Performance System, and we're really happy that what it does is allow a broader picture of what is a successful school. It's no longer dependent on a single test, the Hawaii State Assessment, and whether X number of students make it or don't make it. The Strive High Performance System is a much more well-rounded picture of student success. It looks at things like absenteeism, college enrollment rates. We're looking at just a range of measures that allows schools to really look at how they're performing for all students. And we think that's very, very important. So we're pleased that the Fed has actually agreed that we can use this system, and that $60,000 is support for the data that's necessary for it. The item under EDN 200, starting on page 18, is the supports for schools that have found to be struggling under the Strive High Performance System. This is not unlike the supports we were required to provide in restructuring, but is focused now on the priority and focus schools. And again, we have provided in the past support for restructuring schools. We are now looking at additional supports for the priority and focus schools. Item 2 is additional support for the digital curriculum pilot. This is to support professional development for teachers as they transition to using digital technology in their classroom to transform their teaching. In addition, there is a request for a project manager. This is a very big undertaking. This initial pilot group, we're learning a lot, but in order to take it to another level, we would really need to have a dedicated project manager so that we can really think through all the lessons that we've learned over this past year, and we continue to learn, and really create a program that's, that we can present to you that is really thoughtful about all the issues that we have faced. We will have a briefing on the status of that in the Education Committee later during the session, and so we can delve into the details of that pilot at that time, or if there are any questions today, we can be happy to answer those. Item 3 is for our formative instruction supports. This is one of our major strategies in really trying to have teachers have at their fingertips and the opportunity to change instruction to really suit the needs of the individual students in their classroom. It's very powerful, it's very effective. We want to provide the kind of support for the teachers and the schools so that they can be very effective in the utilization of formative assessments in changing their instruction. Item number 4 is on sabbatical leaves. Both collective bargaining agreements with HSTA and HDEA have provisions for sabbatical leaves. This has traditionally not been a budgeted item. We do believe that sabbatical is a very important aspect for teacher development, and this sum would allow us to provide at least a portion of the teacher sabbatical and EO sabbaticals that's provided for, required in the collective bargaining agreements. Item 5 is our educator effectiveness system, both teacher and principal evaluations. The funding would go towards the tripod or a similar student perception survey. That's one of the key elements of the teacher evaluation. It's also needed to certify our administrators and train them on the Danielson observation protocol that we're using to do teacher observations in the classroom. And it's also for our PDE3 system to do a small modification on that. That system provides professional development support for our teachers, and you'll actually see that as a later supplemental budget item. I'll discuss that later. Again, I mentioned number 6, which was WASC accreditation. In EDN 300, which is where many of our state offices' budgets are located, item 1 is our alternative teacher route. Right now, that is a contract with Teach for America, where they're providing support, training, and a pathway to licensure for teachers in high-need areas, especially those where we've had difficulty filling teacher positions. They have been filling about 100 teacher positions per year through the TFA alternative route for teacher certification. Item 2 and item 3 are both systems for supporting our HR. First, the PDMS, the Professional Development Management System, is actually an online professional development system. And this would go to keep that current with the latest professional development modules. Item 3 is our EHR system. That's our backbone HR system. It is possible that should the ERP, the statewide ERP, get fully implemented in 2 or 3 years out, that some portions of this functionality we may not need. But for right now, this is the core that provides us the data on whether teachers are highly qualified. It is also where we store all of our personnel data. So it's very important that we maintain it. Item 4 is one of our major strategies is around teacher induction and mentoring. We hire anywhere from 500 to 800 teachers a year. This teacher mentoring program is aimed at new teachers, providing them support and guidance as they start their professions. A lot of the funding for the mentoring program is coming from our federal dollars, our Title II professional development money, about $1.5 million from federal dollars. This is the general fund match. In items 5 and 6, we had received authorization for position counts. We thank you very, very much for that. The next 2 items are for the funding for those positions. One for an executive assistant for our Office of Human Resources. As we say, we're a people business. HR is very crucial, and that position will be very helpful to moving our HR systems forward. Our communications office, with all that's going on, we've really tried to beef up our communication, which is an area that's been generally an area of need for many, many years, both internal communication and external. We have 5 positions that were authorized. We're looking for the funding for that. We're very proud of our new website, so if you haven't seen it, hawaiipublicschools.org. We will be launching also an intranet later this month that will be focused on providing information to our own employees. So both an internet and internet portal and as well as an intranet. Continuing with EDN 300, the governor has included in our budget an early learning coordinator position. We actually do not have a position dedicated to the coordination of the early learning programs with our K-12 system, and that's what that budget item would allow for. Item 8 is in our Civil Rights Compliance Office. They handle civil rights compliance, all the different titles, Title IX, etc. Right now, they have a very small staff. I believe they have 3 people, and we're asking for some additional staffing so that they can perform the important compliance functions, and also they do a lot of training for our schools and supporting them so that our leaders in schools understand the civil rights laws and how to comply with them. So they provide a great deal of guidance for that. Item 9, we are members of the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Organization of State Superintendents. We participate in a large number, I think we have 7 right now, of ongoing work groups. It gives us a national perspective. It allows us to learn from the best practices of other states. We share material. So it's been a very positive way for us to gain information from the experience of others.
A vast virus database has been updated.
They pay for our travel to if there are national convenings. So I think we get the most bang for the buck from any other state, since our travel expenses are probably the highest. Item 10 is support for IT. Everything we do now is resting on the use of data and the availability of information technology at the classroom, in the schools, in our state offices, so that we can better manage the information about our students, the information about our teachers, our employees, and our other expenditures. This would provide for additional support for the complex areas. We are hoping to have complex area IT managers that can support directly the IT needs of schools. It will also support additional security measures so we can be assured that our student information and our other data is not hacked, is kept secure and confidential. And also for our networking system, we are completing our BTOP grant. Every school in the state will be connected with high bandwidth, high-speed internet. Every time you raise the bandwidth, there's more need. We'll keep on working on that. But again, the IT positions are crucial to focus our support on making sure that those systems are widely available. The final big-ticket item is on our utilities. Again, our electric use is actually stable. We're very happy about that, even with the increasing number of students and additional facilities coming online. However, the rates are going up, and we have not been able to flip the switch on all of our PV systems. We are looking forward to being able to award a statewide contract on that very soon, and we're hopeful that as we go forward, more and more of our electricity needs will be met through PV, some wind, and other alternative energy sources. We were asked to look at economic and fiscal risks. That's on page 22. Of course, the federal budget is still of concern to us. We do receive significant amounts through our title funding from the federal government. We're hopeful that the signs in Congress are that it will be resolved, and but again, that is still a risk. Our utilities, as I just mentioned, we are in contact and in constant discussion with Hawaiian Electric to make sure that when our schools do have their PV systems installed, that we will be able to take advantage and flip the switch and get on the grid. Student transportation, I'm pleased to note that we should be awarding contracts for the first group of schools, and we're hopeful that we will be able to gain the savings that we anticipate. Again, though, that is an area of risk that we wanted to make a note for you. We did not ask for any money, additional funding for bus transportation this year. We are anticipating savings in that area for the coming fiscal year. In addition, we have some concerns around special education. As you may know, the Ninth Circuit reversed the district court here on the overage students, as they call them. So we are facing the prospect of providing special needs students up to the age of 22, and we are working through some of those issues now. And finally, the question is whether or not our student enrollment will continue to grow. And we anticipate, it looks like it's a continuing trend beyond the change in the kindergarten age. I am going to turn it over to Ray LaRue for the CIP, but I'm wondering whether you'd like to take questions now about the operating budget.
Why don't we take the CIP presentation and then open to questions?
Okay, very good. And I'm going to call now on Ray. Did I not introduce you, Ray? I didn't introduce Ray previously. Ray LaRue, Assistant Superintendent of OSFSS.
I'm not really this tall, but I'm going to stand on my boss's pedestal here. So, good morning, chairs, vice chairs, members of the committee. I'm going to briefly go through our capital improvement program for the department, but first I'd like to thank you for the continued support that the Ledge has provided to our capital improvement program. With that, we've been able to whittle down our R&M backlog. We've been able to address infrastructure issues, and for the first time tackle the oh-so important issues of bringing our systems upgrades into account. The DOE supplemental request reflects the department's biennium budget, with the only addition being the $25 million that we are requesting for our heat abatement acceleration program, which is air conditioning. The DOE believes that this is the minimum amount of funding that we would see necessary to maintain the improvements and not to reverse the trend that we've enjoyed in the last couple of years in reversing that trend of our R&M backlog. As you know, last year we broke down that capital improvement program and the ask into 4 key performance indicators, and those are condition, capacity, program support, and equity. Within this supplemental ask, the condition KPI covers such work as routine repairs, roofing, but also includes those electrical upgrades that we're talking about, the whole school classroom renovation. And in this particular supplemental ask, we're asking for, within the $51 million budget or bucket, our converged infrastructure program, which merges 5 IT programs into one system, and also to eliminate some of the R&M backlogs still left from our zones of schools of innovation, and also the Farrington Auditorium rebuild. Within the capacity KPI, which again addresses new classroom capacity, but also renovations and repurposing of existing space into classroom space, also includes temporary classrooms. And in this particular ask for the supplemental year, we're asking for 5 classroom buildings to be built on 5 campuses statewide, and that's for design money for the $1.5 million. With regards to program support KPI, the program support KPI, it's basically ADA projects or an ADA compliance, gender equity programs, and our athletic program supports. And within this supplemental ask, improvements to softball fields at Kalani and Waipahu High School, the girls' athletic locker room at Kahuku High School, and certainly all of the ADA compliance projects that we have on tap for this supplemental year, to include various schools through the state. The last bucket, or the KPI indicator for equity, and the equity KPI includes such projects as high school classroom upgrades, and to meet the new requirements for our special education classroom renovations. In this particular ask, we're asking for 12 high schools for a complete science upgrade to the science labs, special education classroom renovations at Waipahu High School, Molokai Intermediate, and Kealakehi High School. And what is not in the actual column of equity, but is in the column that you see that says other, is that $25 million ask that will accelerate our air conditioning program. The other bucket of money that is in that other column is the state's $12 million match for the Office of Economic Development DOD grant that will rebuild Solomon Elementary School on Schofield Barracks. That's the capital improvement program in a nutshell, and I'd like to turn it back over to Superintendent to conclude the department's testimony.
Thanks very much, Ray. We're happy to field any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, members, questions for the Department of Education. Representative Morikawa.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent, thank you so much for your presentation. This is a Kauai question, and it involves the middle school in Waimea. It was a few years ago converted from elementary to middle school. That one school does not have a covered play area like the other 2 schools on our island. Is that in your radar for future development, and is it possible to maybe work with the county on a partnership?
Would certainly be willing to work with the county on a partnership. I believe there is a lump sum for playground within the CIP budget, and we can get back to you on whether or not that school is on the list. But I believe almost all schools are. We can confirm that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Representative Woodson.
Okay, thank you. This question is for yourself, Superintendent Brian, or Amy, whoever can best answer it. And first, thank you for the work that you folks do collectively. I think there's a lot of exciting initiatives that are happening right now, and there's a lot of positive change that's happening within the Department of Education. So thank you for that, first off. With regards to impact aid, and there was a bump in federal funding, loosely defined, recently with regards to impact aid. And my question, generally speaking, is how is the department dealing with the constant oscillations with that funding? And as a follow-up question, are there any amounts of that impact aid that are currently not obligated or uncommitted towards any program?
I'll ask Amy to come up and give you some of the detail.
Thank you.
I don't want to stand on the thing. Good morning. Thank you so much. So impact aid funding levels, you are correct that they're every year we're not guaranteed those monies, and it's we don't know how much we're getting until we receive those funds. During fiscal year 13, we received about $82 million of impact aid. Banner year, almost double of what we normally receive. We expect that to be a one-time scenario. With those funds, we have a ceiling established that is mostly used for our substitute teachers. That is not generally budgeted, but we do use impact aid to cover those costs. Also, in this fiscal year, there is a $10 million ceiling established for our schools to purchase Common Core material. So that is using some of that $82 million from last year. I can give you a detailed breakdown of that $82 million on how it's committed or not. I will tell you, we don't know yet what the anticipated levels of receipts are this year. We're estimating probably about $40 million. There is a ceiling established for fiscal year 15 of $10 million again for Common Core materials. But if we don't receive over 38 or 40 million, which is our substitute teacher budget, we would not be able to fulfill that Common Core ceiling. If we had any uncommitted funds from the 82 from last year, depending on receipts from this year, we would fund as much of that 10 million ceiling first, and then look at anything else that's not committed.
So you don't have an actual dollar amount as to how much of the money is uncommitted at this time?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up question, who has the ultimate authority to decide where those impact aid dollars go?
So the superintendent has the authority to, so we have an internal review process where we're looking at those funds. Again, we provide it to the ceiling levels first, where the legislature has provided us the ceilings. That's where the first priorities go, and then any excess over that, we're doing internal review with superintendent final sign-off.
Okay, thank you. Chair, if I may ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
This question is for Mr. Schatz. And it's regarding the Race to the Top and the sustainability plan. I noticed that you have a request in here for $5.6 million. Of course, Race to the Top funding is ending and we're transitioning into state funding. Can you just kind of explain some of the highlights of the overall plan as we transition from federal funds to state funding for those initiatives and efforts?
Thank you, Representative Woodson, for that question. Thank you, chairs, for allowing us this opportunity. So the Race to the Top was intended as a catalytic grant, not as funding for ongoing operations. So we've taken that to heart and tried to build infrastructure that didn't need too much in terms of ongoing funding. That being said, within this supplemental budget request, there are $5.6 million that are continuations of the reforms that have begun over the past few years through the Race to the Top and now that are embedded in our strategic plan. I believe at the end of your PowerPoint, you will see a crosswalking document that shows the Race to the Top projects, whether or not they're included in the supplemental budget, and our sustainability plan. So I think that gives the specifics that you would need to see what's going to be sustained and what we're asking for. To be clear, this would not be an additional ask. This is all embedded in our supplemental budget request as part of our strategic initiatives.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, to whomever wants to answer this question, there is a request for $14 million, an additional request regarding the student-weighted formula. I think Cal had initially recommended $20 million, if I'm not mistaken. The amount that's requested in the budget is $14 million. My specific question is, how did you rationalize that particular figure?
So the COW actually recommended $34 million as an increase. Our instruction was to try to be, the budget instructions were to not ask for too much stuff, which is traditionally what's asked for. We did make an initial request that was more than what is indicated in the supplemental budget, and it's kind of the back and forth that comes in preparing the budget with the governor's office that ended up with the $14 million. When we looked at it and we tried to calculate what this would mean for schools, it did calculate out to approximately one teacher position per school in base funding, again, up to the principal on how they would expend those funds.
Okay, but was there any specific reasoning for the $14 million figure past the one teacher?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, chairs.
Okay, Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question on the CIP area. I'm wondering if there will be any problem in getting the CIP dollars spent, particularly for general funds in 1 year.
No,
you are part of a big pattern in state government in the supplemental requests from the governor where large amounts of GEO bonds are being shifted to general funds. And I mean, if you get the money, what, $98 million in general funds, you have the capacity to spend all of that before FY15 ends?
Yes, we do. And we have a history of expending all of our funds. Yeah. Confirming that with Ray, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, any further questions? Representative Lowen, followed by Senator Thielen.
Thanks. I have a quick CIP question relating to Big Island. And I'm wondering if, when you talked about the ADA compliance projects, if Kahakai Elementary School is included in that list.
We'll check our list and get back to you on that. I don't know if you have the specific list, or do you?
We have many. We have plenty of ADA projects on all islands. So the economic way to bid those out is to lump them up into one contract. But I'll get back to you specifically with that request on that particular school.
Okay, thanks. And I actually have one more quick question. This is about the covered play yards, just kind of following up on Representative Morikawa's question. When you figure out the need for the covers on the play yards, do you look at the amount of sunlight that an area receives, or is it sort of based on, or how do you calculate the need for the cover on the play yard?
It depends on the demographic or geographic area of the school, but if there is a need or a requirement for a covered play court, and that could just be from the heat, it could be from the elements, it could be for any specific reason, but for the most part, when there is a requirement for a covered play court, it is the environment that's making that requirement valid. So that could be sun, heat, or rain.
Because I'll just comment, I guess, that I've heard from schools in my district that don't have covered play yards, and their play yards are very underused, that it's because of sun, and they've said that the calculation is mainly based on rainfall. So, I don't know, we can talk offline about that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Thielen.
Thank you, Chairs. Superintendent, thank you for coming today. I had some questions on the materials and then some other things that came up. And I guess what I'm looking at is at the PowerPoint slide on the EDN 100 request, and then it's also in the table 4. On the PowerPoint slide, I think it's on page 17 or so, it lists 5 items under EDN 100. The first is the weighted student formula. But then there's 4 other items that have specific categories to them: advanced placement initiatives, high core alternative learning centers, the WASC accreditation, and Strive High Performance. Is EDN 100 being broken into subcategories at this point, so that there are weighted student formula funds in the EDN 100 and then also categorical line items for the EDN 100?
That has always been the case. These are not new categories that are being put into the budget.
Well, I imagine the Strive High Performance System's got to be somewhat new.
The Strive High Performance System itself is new, but the program idea is not.
What are how many subcategories are in that EDN 100 aside from the weighted student formula?
They're counting the lines. There are quite a number. Half a dozen? A dozen.
A dozen?
A dozen plus the weighted student formula.
And does the department have the authority to create those subcategorical line items within EDN 100?
I don't believe we have. I've never looked at whether we had the authority to do so, but we have not done so.
Do you know whether any of them are there because the departments put them in there or initiated a request to put them in there?
They've been there for a while, so I would have to go back and research the history on each of the items.
Okay, yeah, I would appreciate some background on that. That would be helpful. Then the other question I had is you had mentioned about some of the impact aid funds going to Common Core materials. I've been talking with a number of principals and schools, and I understand some of them have been directed at the elementary level to purchase textbooks for reading. A certain textbook for reading out of either their impact aids or their weighted student formula funds. And has the department moved to a statewide textbook for the elementary school reading?
We have selected K through 12 common core instructional materials for English language arts and are in the process of vetting math materials K through 12.
Okay, so when you say we have, the central administration has selected common textbooks to be used statewide?
I would say instructional materials because, for example, in math we're using an open source method until we find instructional material that meets the needs of the Common Core and has the kind of instruction that we think is high quality. Yes.
Okay, so I understand the difference between materials and textbooks, but just for old school purposes, I'm going to say textbooks as a shorthand for materials. So, did the Board of Education adopt a policy for us to move to statewide textbooks?
I don't believe there is a policy per se, no.
Okay. So the department administration then took a look at the Common Core, and after adopting Common Core, decided to, at that point, designate statewide textbooks for K through 12.
We went through a process of vetting the materials to assure the highest quality of material, and it has really been in part because we do have highly transient student populations, and when they move from school to school and they have different materials, some of not as high quality, some older, etc., we find that the students really do fall behind. So in looking at it overall, the rationale was, first of all, that we would provide quality materials to all schools, and that there would be a way for us to then create professional development opportunities for all teachers, and then they could share across school lines. And the final thing is that we do believe we're getting some economies of scale in the purchasing of materials statewide.
Okay, then thank you for your reasoning behind that. Is it accurate that some of the schools have been directed to purchase these materials with impact aid monies and with weighted student formula monies?
I actually think the way that the impact aid on the memo that went out was that it was recommended that this is one-time funding. It's not money that they're going to get again necessarily. And so the recommendation was that if they, many have been actually waiting to try to buy new materials, that they utilize those funds for those instructional materials.
And have they also...
It was not actually a mandate, and we have a plan over the next few years that they would transition to the Common Core materials. But it's not a current year mandate that all schools have the same material.
And were the schools also directed to utilize weighted student formula funds for purchasing the...
We don't direct weighted student formula funds.
Okay. But the schools are going to have to transfer over to these statewide textbooks in K through 12 at some point over the next couple years.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Superintendent, I guess I was leaving the Board of Education as you came on into the department, and I guess I'm a little confused because I'm sitting here looking at Act 51, which was passed, I think it was 2006. I'm not sure.
4, I think.
4, okay. So just taking a look at it, it is the legislature's intent to place a far greater number of decisions and a much higher percentage of monies directly in the hands of individual schools and leaders. And there's a significant amount of verbiage in the purpose of this act that talks about the closer that decisions are made to the schools, the more that they can be customized to the student body that is in that school, and can therefore help improve the student achievement more effectively. And it talks about how weighted student formula and placing control over the funding and expenditures in the principal level is one way to get to that, but it's saying that establishing weighted student formula cannot be effective in a vacuum. Other reform measures must be implemented as well. Principals will be empowered to act as educational leaders of their schools, with more authority over the budgeting, expenditure of funds, and the decision making. And my understanding from the efforts that were made at this time is that we set standards to be achieved, but the schools are empowered with the methodology of achieving that. So, for instance, in my district, and I'm sure every other legislator here can cite it in their district, let me give you an example of two schools. One is Aikahi Elementary, which is actually on the border of my district outside of it, but my daughters went there. Very high number of military officer families, more affluent edge of Kailua. And another school in my district is Blanche Pope Elementary, which is one of the smaller schools, Hawaiian homestead kids, I think third highest absenteeism rate in the entire state for schools. I cannot conceive of a single textbook that would span the two very different worlds that those elementary school children live in. And my question to you is, given what was in the law, given the direction to put, some of this decision-making authority and educational leadership into the hands and powering principals, how is it that the department has determined that we're going to now have statewide K through 12 textbooks and education materials for English language and math? How do you reconcile that with the legislative intent behind Act 51?
I actually think a lot of it still rests in the hands of the principal as a leader of the school on how they teach the materials. I actually think that we have statewide standards on what we expect students to be able to learn for them to be successful. I don't believe we should say that some schools, students will achieve less. I don't believe that's an equity issue at all.
Interrupt you. I never said schools will achieve less. And in fact, recently, as the schools have had control to move to articulated curriculum within their schools, and they have had the ability to select the textbooks and materials that will resonate with their unique student body, we have seen improvements in the schools. I would never interpret my question to you as saying it's okay for some schools to achieve less. The question I am raising to you is, how is it that statewide textbooks and materials selected in Honolulu for the K through 12 schools throughout the entire state, and the mandate now to these schools that they are going to, one way or another, have to purchase the materials, when some of them, over the last 10 to 5 years, have gone through the process of identifying their own textbooks, their own articulated curriculum, and their own materials to meet the state standards, now are being told you're going to have to redo that and comply with what the central administration thinks is the most appropriate textbook. How do you reconcile that central DOE decision with what is in the law under Act 51? And what is in the process of the legislature in trying to put money towards weighted student formula to give control over these types of curriculum decisions to the schools?
Ron Nozoe, my deputy, has asked if he can respond to this. Ron is now in charge of all complex area superintendents and has direct access to really all the schools. He's very close to them.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good morning, Chair Yuge, Chair Luke, Vice Chairs Kidani, Nishimoto, and Johansson is not here, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the question. I just wanted to clarify a little bit about the selection process and talk a little bit about the department's direction to select common materials, common instructional materials. The superintendent referenced earlier, the rationale behind the common material selection is really based on an equity issue to make sure that all children have access to the same high quality materials statewide, whether they reside on the Big Island or all the way in Kauai. Second, it's an economy of scale, leveraging our might as the single statewide school district, the 9th largest in the country, where we now are buying common materials. We can leverage not just the purchasing of the materials, as you well know, shipping is an expensive issue for Hawaii, but also the professional development that's associated with training our teachers and principals to implement those materials well. Third, the leveraging of the common materials, and you've referred to them as textbooks, Madam Senator, but the purchasing that we're doing now includes digital licenses as well. So yes, many schools are buying hard copy materials, but those purchases, as we have selected, also come with a digital subscription, which allows when they do transition, if and when they do transition to digital media, they're allowed to upgrade those as the versions change, so to speak, as you're familiar with the Apple or Windows system upgrades, the same concept. The other issue that needs to be addressed, I think, as I asked Superintendent if I could speak to a little bit, was you characterized the selection as a Honolulu-based central office thing, and I wanted to clarify for everyone in attendance that the selection process was a very rigorous process that involved teachers from all over the state. So yes, the central office of the Department of Education is located in Honolulu, but the input was taken from schools, from teachers that work across our state, and our process, which we have one for the English language arts and one for mathematics, is a process that's been nationally recognized as a way to do a high quality selection of materials. We not only involved teachers in the process, we solicited input on how the selection should be done, and as I said, followed a rigorous process. And then I wanted to comment just a little bit on the results. One of the evidence-based, the reason we're leveraging this sort of the whole Department of Education moving together is not everybody doing the same thing on Wednesday. Put your left foot in the box so and so on Wednesday, and at 9 o'clock move it to the right box. That's not what we're doing. We are using leveraging our resources in a way to be the best and smartest consumer, to establish a very high standard. There is still quite a bit of flexibility at the principal and teacher level to implement these things based on their unique student needs, and schools are always encouraged to supplement their efforts, but the common materials is the base, is the floor, not the ceiling.
Superintendent? There are a number of schools, I think in all of our districts, where they have gone through a school-wide selection of their own textbooks and materials. A number of schools that have gone through on their own to upgrade their IT to be able to access materials digitally as well as on paper, and have adopted a school-wide articulated curriculum built around these textbooks and materials that they feel serve their student population the best. They may be of equal value as the ones that you folks have selected, but because they were done through that process at the school level, there's a tremendous amount of ownership and understanding and ability to implement their curriculum to meet the statewide standards, using their own materials. Do you have an opt-out process for the schools where they can crosswalk their own materials to the Common Core standards and decide whether they want to utilize these state textbooks and materials, or is this decision to move to a statewide textbook and materials for the K through 12 curriculum, just that's what we're going to do?
Well, it's not statewide in the mandate. We certainly have some time to consider that, and we'd be happy to talk with our CASs and our principals about what materials they are using.
Okay, so some of the principals in my district have been told that they are sharing with me that they've been required to purchase these. I know these books are coming in at a number of the schools, and earlier you had mentioned it was a transition that was going to take place over the next few years. Right. So are you saying now that it's not a mandate, that schools have the option to not purchase these materials?
I don't believe it's a mandate for them to purchase the materials this year. And we can actually go offline and discuss the specific schools and find out specifically what happened in those instances.
And then can you also explain to me, because I heard everything Ron said, you guys may have done this in the most, excellent way possible, but it still is a decision that's been made to move to statewide materials that the schools, whether they, the majority of them probably did not participate, even if you did go to other teachers, it's just not physically possible to do what you did with every school participating. So there's still a centralized decision that's being placed on the schools that is determining what types of materials they're going to use. And I still have not heard how that can be reconciled with the legislative intent behind Act 51. Earlier, when I asked you whether you had brought this decision to the board for approval, I think you said no. So I guess the follow-up question I have is, how is it that the department administration had the ability to take this step to decide to have a centralized K through 12 textbooks and materials without discussing it either with the legislature or with their policy board? Because this seems to me to be a very huge decision that we're moving to centralized, one-size-fits-all materials. I don't know how that's going to work in your Hawaiian language immersion schools. I don't know how that's going to work in, with the different types of students that we have in the different schools. To me, that's a huge policy decision. And where was the policy discussion about whether that's the appropriate way for the department to head, especially given the drive, in the last discussion that we had publicly?
So a couple of things. First of all, Hawaiian immersion programs clearly are in a separate category. All of their materials in the schools which are Hawaiian language based, so all of their material is in Hawaiian. They would not have these materials. They are creating their own, and in fact some of their challenges are around where can they get the instructional material in Hawaiian that satisfies the needs of their students. So I would set that particular group of schools separate because of that issue. We did have discussions with the Board of Education around this, particularly when the Common Core was adopted and some of the strategies. And it was a time, I believe that was during the elected board, so it was some time ago.
Do you have any board policy which has approved moving to a common K through 12 textbooks and materials?
No.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, any further questions? Superintendent, I just had a follow-up on the weighted student formula. In your description, you're saying that the justification for the increase is due to increased workload by staff implementing educator effectiveness, student data assessment requirements, mentoring, ESAA Flex. I guess the question I have is, what work is done as you are thinking about, for example, the educator effectiveness system and its impact on workload to make sure that the systems being asked to be implemented are consistent with resources?
Right. I'm going to turn to Ron also, because he is the lead for educator effectiveness system and has been working with our CASs and principals. He can answer more specifically.
Good morning again. We are one semester into the statewide implementation of our educator effectiveness system, which for everyone in the audience is the system around teacher and principal performance-based evaluations. And we have for both the teacher group and the principal group a series of I'll speak to teachers first. We have a process with the Hawaii State Teachers Association to look at workload and implementation. We review data. We have a process with what's called the Joint Committee, which is a rather unique in the country structure where the Department of Education and its teachers representatives sit down and work through the data points. And we've had a very positive, not easy, but very positive, collaborative, moving forward relationship with them. And during that, our commitment to that group is to look at the data of implementation, make any changes or improvements along the way. And we have both held to, we're one semester in, which in the education world is not a long time. And we want to make sure that we're making the best decisions based on the data that we collect, rather than sort of knee-jerk reactions. So we have a discipline process laid out for remainder of this year and the following years in the teacher contract to do that. We have been in discussions with the HGEA, the principals union, the union that represents principals, to create a similar structure for that. In the meantime, within the project management side of the educator effectiveness, in my meetings with the teams, we look at the different data points along the way and determine, how is the educator effectiveness system moving forward for both teachers and principals separately and at the same time in conjunction. And we will make recommendations for changes going forward whether they be resourcing issues, whether they be workload issues, whether they be quality of data issues, as we continue to gather more information for the remainder of this school year.
I guess the question is, the testimony provided by the department was that you ran pilots for the teacher and principal effectiveness system, so I would think that you would gather data points as part of the pilot implementation rather than actually try to gather data as you're implementing the live systems.
Thank you, Chair Ige, for pointing that out. I wanted to, perhaps I wasn't clear earlier when I spoke. This work is very difficult work, as everyone's well aware, and we did learn a lot from the, first of all, those 18 schools that piloted in the first year in the zones, the 81 schools, including the 18 schools of the zones that piloted last year, and we are learning a lot more from the 255 schools that are going forward. So this is an iterative process that we knew would not be something that we would just stand up perfectly. And each stage of the implementation, we have learned more and more and more about what needs to change and what needs to improve systems-wise in order to support our people.
Well, I guess the question I have is because in my conversations with the pilot school, it was very clear that the teacher evaluation system would require a tremendous increase in resources.
Yes.
And I'm disappointed that the department actually is launching into it when you knew that there was a tremendous increase in resources and expecting that everything would be implemented well. So I mean, I don't know. I guess when I look at the teacher effectiveness from the educational officer perspective, for example, you know, there's a 500% increase in the requirement as you go from evaluating teachers once every 5 years to evaluating teachers, every teacher every year. So that's a 500% increase in the workload just for the evaluations. In addition, the new requirement is that there be 2 observations plus pre and post conversations. So my estimate is that's probably another 3-fold increase in the workload. So that's a 1,500% increase in the workload to manage the assessment, and no additional resources were provided to the schools. I'm trying to understand how you expected successful implementation.
I guess the simplest way to say it is this work needs to be done for our students. And yes, it is a lot. We've asked our principals and teachers to step up and do a lot in order to move this forward. And Chair Yugi, you're absolutely correct. There are more meetings. There are more observations. I've been around the state talking with principals, and they've all said this is the right thing. It's just a lot to do at the same time. And principals have said over and over and over again that the conversations with their teachers have been the most productive. So we will need to make adjustments in how we implement.
So how are you going to make adjustments at this point in time? I guess that's the question I have, because it's clear that you have good professionals doing their best to implement the program as designed by you guys, but clearly the requirements, the resource requirements are just grossly underfunded. And I guess the disappointment I have is that you guys knew. I mean, I've talked with lots of the pilot schools, and they were provided additional resources through Race to the Top funds, a whole number of things that the current schools are not getting. And they were still not able to implement the pilots with fidelity.
Well, we have repurposed resources to the complex areas to support principals in their training and implementation.
Repurposed from what area?
From RACE and federal fund, Race to the Top funds and Title II funding.
Repurposed to which schools?
Oh, no, to the complex areas, to support the complex areas, to support their principals.
Okay. So what are you doing to reduce the workload at the school level to try and implement some of these initiatives?
Part of the workload challenge is for schools to go through the very difficult process of making sense of the work. Anytime you stand something...
I can tell you they can't make sense of the work. There are too many priority requirements. In the conversations I've had with school level people, they say that you guys are demanding too many things without resources.
You know, we track statewide the implementation of the 6 priority strategies, and we've been just overwhelmed by the level of dedication that our people have had. I meet with the complex area superintendents on a quarterly basis to track the school-by-school implementation that's reported by principals about where they are. And the results, which I looked at right after the Christmas break, were amazing. And our principals have gone out.
You're just giving a soapbox answer. We would appreciate the answer to the various questions. I mean, we know it's for the kids. We know people are working hard. We don't need the soapbox response. Just answer his question.
Which is, what is the state doing to reduce or juggle the requirements or the workload that all of these new initiatives are having at the school level with no additional resources?
As far as the day-to-day school-level operations, we are collecting the data on their implementation now, and we will use that information to think about ways to mitigate that workload.
Okay, so you guys aren't doing anything. Okay, thank you. Questions? Representative Onishi.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, Superintendent. I noticed the request for additional IT positions, and specifically 7 IT specialists, 3 to improve quality and responsiveness of information technology services and support to the schools, complex areas, and state administrative. Did I understand correctly that these would be either direct support to complexes or districts within the state?
We're planning to have 1 for every complex area superintendent.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, I had a question regarding the school computerization projects that we funded last year. And if you could kind of give us a status of that project, because there are a school in my district that one of the issues, I guess, that they came across in terms of implementation is the need for some ongoing support in the IT area. So how, I mean, what's the status of the project and how these people might be able to provide services or support to those schools?
So currently, all of the schools, the 8 pilot schools, have received professional development support for their teachers and their schools on the devices as well as on the curriculum that's on the devices. And then they'll be rolling out to all students this month. So that's the current status of it. The complex area IT person support would cover a wide range of supports, including the networking support that's needed for them to be able to access things like the internet from their school. We are looking at the issue of how much additional support we can provide. The idea of the devices was that they would be under a contract that would provide for all the maintenance. So, machine breaks, they have spares. They can actually switch it out. They don't have to have someone on staff who's sitting there trying to fix the device. And they also have maintenance contracts along with, theft protection, et cetera, on the device itself. So there's some of those kinds of things that we can build into the devices. I think as we roll out more and more technology, the issue of extended technology support is a really big question. The 7 positions are a start. I think there's going to need to be more at the school level as well. But right now, that would be a pretty significant request. And right now, we're asking for the ones at the complex area level. So they can kind of spread it out amongst all the schools within that complex area.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Tokuda.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. Just have a couple of different questions, and I wanted to just follow up since Representative Onishi did bring up the tech coordinator positions, wanted to clarify that they would have a direct connection with David Wu in terms of being able to communicate directly up to state office in terms of our tech needs, and
That's
would
correct.
communicate with him on a regular basis. Would they also have a direct connection with the tech coordinators in their schools and their complex areas so that we would be able to interface in terms of if there's any problems as they're running some of the assessments, and they can report back to you.
We want them to be that linchpin position between the
Two-way
state office
communications.
expertise and the school level needs.
Okay, so
that's one of their key roles.
So they'd basically be part of the CAS system, the complex area support teams.
That's correct.
Okay, that's really good in that particular sense. Before I get into Common Core, which seemed to be a hot topic, and I wanted to ask a question then, but wanted to go into the SPED item, and I know you may not have an answer for me right now, but in terms of the Ninth Circuit decision and going up to age 22, which I know we even have to change statutorily because right now I think our statutes reference age 20,
right.
And we'll have a bill for that. At one point, I know we did do an estimation, although I think it might have been possibly high and premature back in October in terms of what the cost might be to go to age 22 and also to retroactively provide education to those individuals as a result of that court decision. Education, but what might we be looking at in terms of a cost for that particular item, and would that be a line item in 150, or is that going to be a claim against the state?
Well, with respect to students who are now being under the Ninth Circuit decision, have the ability either to return to the school or to receive compensatory education, that amount is subject to ongoing litigation. So we don't have an estimate now that we could really discuss. On a go-forward basis, we're trying to evaluate how many students actually continue beyond age 20 to age 22. Again, these are students who do not graduate. They may receive a certificate of completion, but they are entitled now under the Ninth Circuit ruling to receive services up to age 22. So we're trying to get that number more clearly defined and the services also so we can provide a better estimate. But we're still not there.
Is this a number we're going to have, though, obviously by this session, because we'll have to be providing those services from this year, I'm assuming? And how complicated is that? Because in terms of, I don't know that you'd still have them necessarily on campus. I mean, I know some of them will be, but in some cases you might have private placement. In some cases you might have different types of settings for these individuals who are actually adults that will be getting free and appropriate education through the state. Right, so in these cases.
One of the complicating factors is that we did modify our student information system to be in compliance with the state law, and so we tracked the students until age 20, and then we did not continue because obviously they were no longer in our schools. So it's a bit of an investigative matter to go back actually into the actual student files and try to see if we can make contact with students who have now left the system. And then what has happened to them. So some may have gone on to an adult program. They may want to stay in the adult program. Some may want to come back to school. So it's been a bit of a forensic effort to go into each school and pull each file and try to determine what happened to that student and whether they'd be coming back. That would be for students currently. On a go-forward basis, we would want to see how many students, again, do not graduate, because if they graduate with a high school diploma, then they're basically done with the K-12 system. But how many students do not graduate and then would continue for the next few years? We have a person who's now dedicated to trying to figure that out. But again, our initial effort has been around the litigation itself and trying to track that number and find out what the cost would be.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to touch back. I know that, and I know we'll also be doing some additional informational briefings specifically on some of these topic areas, but in relation to some of the discussions around curriculum, I noticed that we have a number of supplemental requests for professional development, which I know we've had some tightenings, some significant tightenings in the last few years as a result of the downturn in the economy and whatnot. But my understanding is this is critical as we go towards Common Core, because one of the differences in looking at it is it's not just about the materials, it's in the teachers that make the difference. I see Ed from HST in the audience, and that's where the real difference comes between one school and another. It's not just the textbook or the iPad, it's the educators. So you've got the Strive High resources, you've got the sabbatical leave, which I know is part of the contract requirements, actually, if I'm not mistaken, as well as some other professional development management tools. So I think we have over $2 million or so in PD, which is a component part of it, which makes the difference in terms of how you greatly enhance and differentiate the curriculum from school to school, classroom to classroom.
That's correct, and we're very appreciative too that last year the legislature did fund the 21 additional hours of professional development that's in the HSTA contract, and that's crucial for the teachers to have the time for that professional development opportunity.
Okay. Do we also have resources for formative assessments in here? I know that's one big component that we're looking at as well as part of, the Strive High system that we have in place as part of the waiver, the federal waiver.
Right. So it's on page 18, and it is one of the elements in the waiver. So under our flex waiver, or as we call it here, Strive High Performance Index, there are a number of obligations to the Fed, and those are the ones that some of these that we've enumerated here.
Is that something that we're, not that every teacher doesn't already know how to effectively utilize formative assessments, but is that something that's going to be built into the professional development to really help teachers best utilize the data that they have access to through these formative assessments? Even, I know you have data teams that are at every school now, but is that something that's part of the professional development, giving each teacher the skill sets to know how to best utilize in their classroom all the wealth of information and resources that they have available to them? Because that comes naturally for some, but for others, especially those who may be teaching the same way for a long time, it may not be as natural. So is that something that we're ingraining into the PD? Is that something we're even working with TECC, the Teacher Education Coordinating Council, on integrating into their pedagogy for the teachers coming up now?
It is one of the key strategies, and it does relate very closely to the data teamwork. And so it's all about trying to utilize data, make data first available to the teachers in a way that's easy for them to use, and then how do they use it? And that's where the professional development comes in. So they are able to use the data in a way that's thoughtful and effective in changing their teaching to meet the needs of their students. It is also part of why we are trying to integrate some of the technology so that it's easy for them to get to. It's not so hard. You don't have to log into different programs, et cetera, that it's more easily accessible to teachers in the classroom. That also brings up the issues around networks in the schools, et cetera. So it all starts to be very, very interconnected.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Woodson, did you have a question?
Thank you. I noticed that in the budget there is a request for $431,000, a little bit more for communications and a community affairs office. I guess this kind of all ties into some of the variables that we've been discussing here, and specifically relating to Common Core. And as I understand it, Common Core, in fact, is internationally benchmarked, meaning that they took a look at what other successful school systems are doing, not only in the United States, but around different places around the globe, and said, this is where our students should be at. This is where we strive for our students to be at. As I go out into the community, there is a misconception that maybe the Department of Education is not doing enough in terms of servicing our kids. That is not found based upon facts, but it is, for whatever reason, a misconception that's out there. As we move forward with these Common Core standards in terms of preparing our students so they're ready to compete with anyone in the workforce, or if they decide to go on to the collegiate level, is this funding request specifically relating to outreach into the communities? And if not, what is being done to try to reach out to let the communities know about some of these changes that are happening, some of these positive changes that are happening within the department, and how can we use those changes also to potentially better support our teachers?
So there's a couple of different sub-questions that I hear in that. One of them on explaining the Common Core. We are going to be going out a lot more to parents in this coming year, more in the media about the Common Core. We have something called the Roadshow Package, and complex area superintendents in schools will have a sort of a package, a meeting in a box kind of thing that they can take out to their SCCs so that they can explain what the Common Core is to the parents directly. And we feel that the most important thing is providing those tools to the schools and to the teachers so that they can have those conversations with the parents in their own communities. So that's one piece of it. The other is that the communications office now has tried to utilize a range of electronic and social media, which is pretty new for the Department of Education. It might be old school for a lot of other people, but it's just pretty new for us, with a Facebook page and a Twitter feed and a number of e-newsletters that we're trying to get to reach out to more and more people and have that available. That's all incorporated on our internet site as well. We're trying to make that way more user-friendly, easy to get the information. You can click on the Common Core link and get a lot more information. So those are some of the things around the Common Core that we're looking at. We are also starting up with the larger businesses in the community, asking if we can get in to talk with their employees, put flyers in their paychecks, just kind of think out of the box about how we can use our community partners' sources to get information to employees about the Common Core. So those are some of the things that we're trying to reach out to explain what it is, and kind of trying to hit it on all fronts and see if we can get more information out. It's not an uncommon problem. When we go to CCSSO, one of the issues in our national convenings has been that there's not a good understanding of the Common Core, what it means, what it looks like. And so a number of states have been banding together and trying to share, what is it that works for them. And if you look at some of the states, Kentucky, for example, is a really outstanding program. And so we've been trying to learn from them.
Okay, members, any further questions? Senator Thielen?
Thank you. Superintendent, as you guys have gone through the identification of these statewide textbooks and materials for K through 12, have you got an estimate of how much it would cost to purchase those for all the classrooms that we have?
I don't have it available to me now, but we can go and find that based on the current pricing. But again, it depends how they're phasing it.
Do you have a line item in the budget for this purchase of textbooks at the state level?
No.
Okay. Prior to walking in the door today, what was the plan on how to pay for these textbooks and materials over the next, beginning this year, over the next few years when you had wanted them purchased?
I think it was following the same historic way that it has been done. And that's been, as schools find the need, they look for it through their weighted student formula.
Okay, so
and
the plan was to pay for it out of the weighted student formula?
And if there's additional funding sources, such as the large amount of the federal impact aid that we received last year, we try to allocate resources to the schools so they can reach those goals.
So what I'd like to know is, in the $14 million request that you have in the supplemental budget for the weighted student formula, how much of that is intended to go for the purchase of these statewide textbooks and materials?
That is a decision to be made by the principal.
Excuse me, Superintendent, but you've told me that the principals are going to be required to purchase these textbooks and materials over the course of either this year or the next few years. You've told me that the plan is it's going to be paid for out of weighted student formula. So I have a hard time to say that it's up to the principals whether they're going to use their weighted student formula or not to pay for it, because it sounds to me like what the department is doing is basically directing how at least a portion of those weighted student formula funds are going to be expended. What I'd like to know is, what's the estimated cost for these textbooks, because that would allow us to then take a look at this $14 million request in weighted student formula and determine how much of that was planned for the textbooks and materials. The other question I have is, how can the legislature be confident that the central department is not making other mandates on how weighted student formula funds must be spent?
So as to the first question, we can certainly go back and look at how much has already been expended, what schools have already purchased materials, and then project for the committee chairs and provide that information to the committee chairs on the cost of providing instructional materials for all students in the state.
To make it easier for you, you don't need to go and check how many schools have already purchased it. Why don't you just give us what the cost would be statewide for these materials? It might be easier for you and faster turnaround.
Okay. The one issue would be, though, if you're looking at what is needed to fund the balance, you'd want to know what has already been expended because you wouldn't have to fund that again.
From what I've been told, the funds have already
been
been told to come out of the impact aid funds and the weighted student formula. So I think, we can just take a look at what's the total cost and what's your request. But the second question is, if the intention of the legislature is that the weighted student formula, the determination of how those dollars should be spent should be made at the school level, how can we be confident that that's actually the case when we appropriate these monies if the department is mandating certain actions be done and the school's being told that they're going to have to fund it out of their weighted student formula funds?
Well, I think, first of all, that most of the schools, all of the schools are doing their academic financial plans, and we can certainly consolidate that information and provide it to you. As to the first matter, though, I just wanted to be really clear on the information that we'll provide to the chairs. We'll certainly provide the total number, and if we can provide additional detail, we will do so. So I just wanted to make sure we close the loop on what the item is that we owe information on. So with respect to the second question, again, the academic financial plans are there. We do have a statewide system. Our philosophy has been to look at how we can look at those items which make the most sense for us to do on a statewide basis, and then also allow as much room as possible for customization for individual communities. But one of the things that I really believe strongly is that there are opportunities for some things to be done statewide, and that it is efficient to do so, it is effective to do so, and I'm not so sure that principals really want to take on some of the burdens, such as the arrangement of bus transportation or the payment of utility bills, some of those things that are truly, make more sense to do on a statewide basis.
Superintendent, we're not talking about arranging for bus schedules. We're talking about what curriculum, textbooks, and classroom materials are being utilized in the schools. And if you are really concerned about the principal's choice, the way the department would have rolled this out is to say, here are textbooks that do meet the Common Core standards, and you have the option of purchasing them. But if you are happier with the textbooks and classroom materials that your school has adopted over the past few years, and you have crosswalked them to the Common Core standards, and you're finding that they resonate with your students, and you've had success and you want to continue with that, then you can. So I have a hard time, listening to this and saying that we're concerned about the principals, because I don't think the principals were given an option on whether or not that they wanted to acquire these particular textbooks and classroom materials that were selected through the central administrative process. And again, I don't want you walking out of the room saying, I'm supporting lower standards, because if you take a look at certain schools like the University Lab School, they've had curriculum and textbooks and classroom materials that back when I was on the Board of Education, it was the only school system where the student achievement increased the longer that they stayed in the schools, and that they were at, well far above and beyond at the high school level student achievement than anyone else. So I support that student achievement. What I'm concerned about is this direction the department's going in, is you are taking away that initiative that has been shown in certain schools where they have stepped forward, they have identified textbooks and classroom materials that work for their students, that they have struggled through a school-wide process to adopt them and implement them, and now they're being told you're going to have to use your very limited amount of discretionary money in weighted student formula for something that the central administration has decided to implement statewide without board approval and without legislative approval and without a sincere public discussion about going to statewide textbooks and materials.
Thank you, members. Any further questions? Superintendent, if you could also add, I know that the assistant superintendent had said that there would be expected savings from the going to the common material. So maybe if you can provide the savings generated. Okay, members, any further questions for the department? Okay. If not, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
We're adjourning this hearing. Members, we do have another hearing this afternoon starting at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.